Remember that with your professional development part B, which is a responsibility of any staff member at SPCNM, that's to be submitted by the first week of November 2023, and you're able to put down this 2-hour session as part of that part B professional development plan. So if you feel comfortable with moving forward, we'll get started. And Karen, thank you very much for just letting me know that your camera will be turned off for the moment. So with the professional development, we're going to look today at assessment design and academic integrity, which is an important component for all of you moving forward in education. And a number of the professional developments that I've presented since I started in 2020, recognising that staff weren't aware of adult learning principles, weren't aware of andragogy, weren't aware of pedagogy, weren't aware of teaching and learning principles, that remember all of these professional developments are stored on the teaching and learning staff resources page so that you can go back and view any of those presentations. These types of presentations weren't in place by the college before 2020. So let's get started. And I'll share my presentation and we'll go from there. And I'll just move the Microsoft Teams icon out of the way. So as I mentioned, we're looking at assessment design and academic integrity. And there are 3 session objectives for this particular session today. So the first objective is identify a 3-step model for assessment design for academic integrity. I'm currently a member and have been a member for the last 2 years of the Australasian Academic Integrity Network. And that network meets annually and throughout the year to discuss AI and concerns around assessment design. And I've also been involved in academic integrity units with the major institutions in New Zealand, put forward by Rachel Fulton, who works at University of Auckland. So much of the information that's going to be shared today will come from that collaboration and network. But in addition to that, this information is drawn largely from recent work presented at the Australasian Academic Integrity Network Conference 2023. So that first session objective, identify a 3-step model for assessment design for academic integrity, and we'll define those 2 terms shortly. The second session objective is recognise how this model could be applied to assessment practices at SPCNM. So we're going to have a look at, well, what do we do in terms of assessment as a team, and how could we take that 3-step model for assessment design for academic integrity and see whether or not we can integrate some of those processes across the processes and procedures we already have in place. And the third session objective will be practice. So you practice using this model against an SPCNM assignment. So depending on our numbers, by the time we get to that session objective, we'll look at breaking into groups of 3. Within that group, one of the staff selecting an assignment for a staff member in that group, and then looking at the 3-step model against that assignment and identifying whether there are strengths there that align with that 3-step model, or if there's limitations that need to be addressed. So let's move on. So let's have a look at session objective 1. Now, in terms of session objective 1, just wanting to point out a couple of definitions. So the first definition is around assessment design. So when we're looking at assessment design, it's really important to acknowledge. I'm just going to check that everybody's still there and you can still see my PowerPoint presentation.
Yep, we can.
Okay, fantastic. It's just gone down on my screen, so I'll just reopen that and reshare that.
I mean, it went down on my screen as well,
Yeah.
but I can see that you're trying to open it again, just to let you know.
Yeah. It'll start opening. I think it may have just paused on Microsoft Teams, so just bear with me for a moment and we'll get there. So returning to the presentation now, I'll just relocate that slide we finished on and reshare. Thank you for your patience, everyone. So knowing that first session objective, we're just going to go into two definitions now, because one of the things that I identify for teaching staff is that before you even get to do anything you do, it's very important to define clearly, and I mean very clearly, what you're actually doing. What do you mean by pathophysiology? What do you mean by preclinic? What do you mean by transformational learning? What do you mean by nutrition assessment? If it's not made clear, it's not ever going to be clear to your learners because you don't understand what you're actually doing. So definitions are important. So in terms of definition around assessment design, there is a definition here that is drawn from the work of Jahn et al. So a process for creating or modifying assessment. And we have a procedure in place that was brought into effect after I started in 2020 around creating a new assessment or updating an existing assessment. Prior to that, it would happen very quickly in very short meetings that really didn't get to the heart of the matter around pre-assessment moderation, unfortunately. So it's a much bigger process than just meeting for a short time. The process focuses on the purpose of assessment, context of assessment, learner outcomes, the tasks, feedback processes, and also interactions. So there does have to be an element of collaboration among different staff, not all staff, but staff where certain assessments integrate well. So we know that Gemma Murphy and Wayne Hill will regularly communicate around what's happening in pathophysiology and therapeutics, or Stacey Jarvis and Wayne Hill around Therapeutics 1 and Therapeutics 2, or Sonia McNaughton and Gemma Murphy around Biochemistry of Foods, Nutrition 1, Nutrition 2. And so individuals like myself and Karen Mees have a greater level of responsibility about reaching out to other staff and checking in with them about what they're doing, how it relates to clinical practice, how it relates to the overall program. So assessment design, that's one area we're looking at today. Academic integrity, so the expectation that teachers, students, researchers, and all members of our academic community at SPC&M act with these key principles, and this is outlined in our academic integrity module that students must complete in Foundations of Research, but they also must complete prior to enrolment in programs at SPC&M. And this has been heavily updated and benchmarked across other institutions to make sure that we're meeting a standard. So in Australia, the Regulator for Higher Education, which is the Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency, or TEQSA, put forward this definition. We follow at SPC&M these principles effectively. So we look at honesty in assessment, truth, fairness, respect, and also responsibility. The responsibility on staff, all members of the community, but definitely the adult learner. So that first session objective is around identifying a three-step model for assessment, design, and academic integrity. So let's have a look at this. So at a recent conference that I attended, this work was presented by some colleagues from the University of Southern Queensland, and a fabulous presentation. And this particular presentation had been on my mind for some time, thinking, what is something else that could add value to the current assessment and moderation policy, teaching and learning policy, teaching and learning framework, and the procedures that we have in place. Recalling that no procedure was written down for SPC&M before I started in 2020, not one. So it's really important to have information written down and take research and integrate it throughout an entire organisation. So this three-step model, I've just adapted how it was first presented to me, but we've got 3 steps here. So the first one, and we're going to go through each in detail, is assessment is meaningful and important. So just have a think about that yourself for a moment. Have there been times where you have taught a course that included assessment and asked yourself, is this meaningful to the learner? Is it actually important to their future success? The second step is on appropriate measures being implemented to deter or to detect any type of breaches in academic integrity. And that is known as a breach of academic integrity or academic misconduct. And if you've ever given yourself the opportunity to sit down and read the course lecturer handbook or the student handbook, I know every single staff member who now completes a course lecturer induction must read those documents prior to week 1 start date. But in those documents, it includes the academic misconduct matrix and principles around academic integrity. And the third critical step for assessment design and academic integrity is artificial intelligence assessment hygiene practices. So what practices do we have potentially at SPC&M to avoid the future concerns around artificial intelligence? At a previous professional development that I gave this week on staff wellbeing to core staff, so full-time and part-time staff at SPC&M, in the very last session objective, I was using an AI tool, ChatGPT, to work through initiatives that ChatGPT could provide on staff wellbeing based on keywords and inputs that I was placing into its system. It can be used effectively to generate content very rapidly, but we're also wanting to have a look at what concerns might present for you as an educator when students are using these tools to assist them with completion of their assessment. Latest research in Australia, it's not yet published in New Zealand, but in Australia, is that approximately 8% of students will use AI to complete their assignments. Now, if you think of one of our partners, who is one of the top universities in Australia, Torrens University, they have 21,000 students, and that's only one university among many. So when we think about the number of students across a country enrolled in institutions completing assignments, 8% is quite a large number of students. So let's look in detail at this 3-step model. Let's take the first step. Assessment is meaningful and important. So let's just think through this. There's 7 points here by Balu and colleagues from the University of Southern Queensland. And what's great about this work is that it's been published in terms of conference, but there's going to be a journal article published out of this work based on their literature review and what steps they've taken to implement this across different programs at the University of Southern Queensland, from diploma level all the way through to Masters of coursework. So point one, assessment that is of genuine interest to students. How frequently do we look at our assignments and say, will students actually be interested in doing this? If I was a student, would I be genuinely interested in doing this? And some courses that have a practical component, such as the clinical courses, pre-clinic, clinical practice 1 to clinical practice 4, that bachelor degree students complete at the end of their Bachelor of Natural Medicine program, will have a genuine interest in completing certain assignments across those courses because it adds value to what they will be doing in future practice. But do we look at that for some of our other assessments across the institution? 2, if we're looking at programmatic assessment across an entire program, how frequently do you at the start of your PowerPoint presentations go through all the graduate profile outcomes directly related to your course? Many of you would have seen the template that I've used for Foundations of Research. Gemma Murphy now implementing this, Aqua Hastings now implementing this, Sonia McNaughton now implementing this, Wayne Hill now implementing this. And all course lecturers that I've met with across the 2 programs that we currently run, both the New Zealand certificate and the degree, can see that I'm working with you each week across a term to update Moodle so that we include this information so it's very clear to students. Why are they doing this work? Why are they doing this assessment so that they can successfully reach these graduate profile outcomes? Do you have a look at them? Do you know them? Are you highly familiar with them? Point 3, relatable topics, so real world activities and solutions. So are they relatable to your students? You know, I'm 41 now. Some of the things that I hear my children say are foreign to me. So if we have an adult learner who is 18 years old, are we living in their current world? Is this something that is specific to going out into study skills and progression for the New Zealand certificate? Is it something that is part of the real world and real world solutions, going out to be a naturopath or a herbalist? Point 4, aligns with learning outcomes and generic transferable attributes. So it's a process of constructive alignment. In 2021, when I had been at the college for a year, I'd recognised through 2020 that no academic director or chief executive had ever written a constructive alignment document. So I wrote one for the degree and I worked with Robin Carruthers to generate for the certificate. And with a constructive alignment document, it's looking at how graduate profile outcomes, learning outcomes, generic transferable attributes like teamwork, come together alongside of assessment and other courses. And that 2021 document that was sent to NZQA for our yearly academic performance evaluation review included the constructive alignment document. And then that constructive alignment document, which is around 20 pages, I just published everywhere. Teaching and learning, I put down all the hallways, 3 copies of it. I put in the teaching and learning spaces, just so everybody could get good access to that. I think a lot of those documents, since I have left the physical location of the college, have been taken down, but that constructive alignment document exists to show relationships between different courses, assessments, and what is going on. So if you've not yet had a look at that, please reach out to me. I'd love to pass that on to you. 5, assessment that the student will know will matter in the workplace. I hear that a lot from students, year 1, year 2, and year 3, when I have academic meetings with them. Like, why am I actually doing this? Why do I have to go to Mind Body? Why do I have to go to pre-clinic? Why do I have to do X, Y, and Z? And of course, we only know what we know, right? So a student can't be expected to know everything that a teacher, a graduate, an expert, an educator is going to have knowledge of, understanding of, and a skill set for. So we're wanting to make sure that when we piece together our assessments, if they're meaningful and important, that the student will know that it matters in the workplace. Point 6, authentic assessment. Knowledge and skills for real world settings, these naturalistic environments that we're in. So we walk into SPC&M College, I go to my right and there's a door there open to the Power Clinic, a naturalistic environment, a setting where students can walk in and they become a student practitioner. I do think personally that you become a student practitioner the day that you enroll in a degree course that has a clinical program. I believe it's important in terms of level 4 programs like the New Zealand certificate that you're working with a student who is already mindful of what their career trajectory will be and that you remind them of that all of the time. Why are they here? Why will this matter? 7, learner choices available. In your assignment, is there a choice? Now, some assignments, there won't be a choice. And some traditional assignments like tests for pathophysiology or for anatomy and physiology may not have learner choice, but they do have versions. In 2020, only one version of each test. Now we have multiple versions of tests. So there can be learner choice outside of the model of, well, you can ask question A or question B or question C. But there are courses that provide option. So you could go to Herbal Medicine 2, for instance, have a look at Wayne Hill's course, and students do have the option of making a choice in terms of what herbs they're going to present as part of their herbarium manufacturing. There is choice in that, and that relates to aspects of authentic assessment. It's also true for the research report for Therapeutics 2. Again, another course that Wayne Hill will teach. There are options for individuals to pick their research topic for their research report. And this year, we have some new research topics that Wayne has never, ever in the history of his time at South Pacific College, plus 25 years, been asked about, taught, had written as part of assessment. So a new world out there of new questions, which is what should be happening in education institutions. The second step, appropriate measures are in place to deter and detect breaches of academic integrity. Right, so in terms of models, I've added a I there to voice, but in terms of how we would say this in Italian, viva voce, so VOCE models are about using oral presentations to deter breaches in academic integrity, because we're all aware at this point in time, I hope, that something like an essay is compromised because students could use OpenAI, such as ChatGPT, to help them write their assignment. And I have used OpenAI, ChatGPT to place assignment 2 from CSP 411, Introduction to Biological Sciences, which Sylvan Lockie teaches. And assignment 2 is based on the history of germ theory. OpenAI scores me almost 100% when I piece in my keywords for that particular assignment. So it is available for use for students, and part of looking at deterring the use of AI for assessment is looking at different assignment types. One of those can be an oral presentation. And what's interesting is that the recent literature that's being reported by our external regulator that regulates our programs, the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, NZQA, are really pushing this idea of more student peer assessment, group collaboration assignments, and oral presentations. And you can do that for anatomy and physiology, you can do that for pathophysiology, even traditional courses that have predominantly used tests. Point 2, assessments are completed and monitored in class. Massey University, one of the major universities across the world, but very much so in Auckland, New Zealand, made a decision post-COVID. We're going to bring all of the students back into the classroom, and we're going to make sure that they sit paper tests, no more online tests. There's a move. Students didn't like that. Some staff didn't like that, but Massey is staying very strict to that rule. And it can be a way to deter. I remember going to school with one of the Sydney City Roosters players in the NRL, and I went to school from year 6 all the way through to year 12 with this student. And I remember going into a HSC exam and this student just having all of what they thought would be the answers written across both of their arms, almost similar to the presentation of tattoos, and then rolling down their sleeves. And I'm not sure, I didn't sit anywhere near this particular student when I was in the examination, but it was just interesting to see what has shifted when I completed my final year of schooling in 2000 and what that looks like today in terms of overcoming systems. What measures are we putting in place to deter and detect? Point 3, invigilated examinations. So we have those. We have within our procedure for the administration of tests, which is a procedure that is often carried out by the academic administrator, and this is accessible via the public drive on the college network. But we have online invigilation and we have external invigilation. And with external invigilation, we're having people there on site watching the student. When we're completing online, SPC&M do need to make some moves that I've recommended to academic board and to the chief executive and management, which is now their responsibility with my exit, to make sure that they're going to include certain software packages that have been recommended through external moderation for online invigilated examinations. And I'd really ask you as teachers, you're just as responsible as anyone at the college to make sure these things happen. 4, peer review assessment. So we've got some peer review. There's peer review assessment in DDPE, but it's authentic assessment. So you're in the class, you're actually viewing someone complete a physical assessment and giving them feedback on that, and then completing the paperwork to go with that. But there are institutions, quality institutions, that have systems in place where students are grading the work of others, and that peer review assessment provides an opportunity for learners to actually see what other people are doing, how they're writing, but they can learn from that process, and teachers can be involved in that process saying, look at this sentence, look at the setup of this paragraph. And that can be anonymous so that the student is not embarrassed or overwhelmed by that. But students need to be taught how to write. I was very fortunate in my first undergraduate degree when I went into an honours program that I actually had a professor that I worked with for many years thereafter who taught me how to write. How do you write? And I see a lot of institutions, first year student goes into their program and people will not work with them to actually support their writing and their skill. And this is something at SPC&M that we do to extraordinary lengths. 5, small class sizes with assessment in
Mark,
classes. Yes.
Sorry, Mark. I'm just not sure whether you could see that I just put my hand up because I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Thank you, Karen.
Sorry.
Go for it, please.
No. I just wanted to ask about the peer review, whether or not that is predominantly used for formative assessments, or is it being used for summative assessments as well?
Yeah, for both, and it's a good question. So when there's co-constructed, which is a little bit further down, formative assessments, that can also be summative, which is a point I'll get to. The literature is looking at both formative assessment and summative assessment tasks.
Great. And the reason why I wanted to ask that is looking at efficiencies in grading and a portfolio of assessments, that it could be really useful to have that peer review for as a way to make sure that the assessment load is spread out and that in-class assessment. So I'm quite interested in that. So I might need to just check with you a little bit post this professional development, because yeah, that would be quite good. And I'm talking about it in like just having done a postgrad paper where it was collaborative annotation of journal articles that was worth, each assessment was worth 2%, and I really liked that model because it got you engaged in the literature. Everybody was putting their input and answering other people's queries, adding more research in, and I really liked that model. It wasn't worth a lot of the overall percentage, but what it did was, and actually even the professor said that she didn't expect people to have such in-depth engagement with it. So you actually created, and it created engagement beyond what was expected and a lot of learning. And so I think those sort of models can be really helpful. And that one wasn't peer assessed, but I could see how that model could be taken and used in a classroom environment.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So thanks for that.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. Thank you for that feedback. It's extraordinary in terms of these processes that they can be very effective, even when the learner may not think that to be the case initially. So a good example around peer review assessment is in foundations of research, students will, and this is for a formative task, but it does receive a grade of competency and they must do it in order to pass the course. They must put up a discussion topic question each week related to the coursework that's been taught. And then even within that process, they need to write a response to a student who's put forward a topic question and answer that topic question through their response. But then another student needs to come in and reflect on the response that's given and argue points for or points against. Now, for peer review, that still includes a process of students reviewing the work of others and providing feedback to help centralise their knowledge, condense their knowledge, and support their learning. And I'm just going to pause for a moment because I just need to turn something off and I'll be back. My sincere apologies. So with peer review assessment, it can be formative. And then what I did in 2023 semester one, when I taught foundations of research, I showed the students that I had in that cohort how I go through assignment 1 and assignment 2, and great. And then all of the students that were in that cohort, they were a very good group, but I believe that it was my input and my creation of their study groups. Every student in that Foundations of Research class was in a study group, either weekend study groups or weekly study groups. And they would go through that process of peer review. Now, in me doing that, it wasn't formalised, but most essays, after I really worked on showing them how to do that, which was the time that I put in, Anyone who was receiving an A or a B was taking me about 18 minutes to grade. It was a very, very fast process. I actually have anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes to grade an individual student's paper because of the changes we've made to assessment and the additional time that's necessary. But I agree 100%, Karen Mees, that my experience so far, and I've also had this experience after I implemented this working for the University of Newcastle on a master's program this year, that this peer review process works very well for the end user, which was me grading the master's papers, that they were just so polished prior to coming to me, have made the process very efficient. So I'd love to speak more about even just that point at another time if people are open to it. So thank you very much, Karen. Is everyone happy for me to keep moving on? Excellent. So point 5, and just before I go into point 5, I'm just seeing my screen at the moment. So I've removed the Microsoft Teams icon just so it's not in front of any of the words. So if you do have a question, please just speak up, or if you see for Aqua, for instance, if Aqua's mic is not on at this point in time and you see a chat comment come up, please just let me know and I'll follow up. So point 5, small size classes. So we have in our teaching and learning framework that I wrote in 2022, approved by the academic board, that includes external academics, including one representative from NZQA, is that there should be no more than 25 students in a class. So if you've got over 25, that's going outside of what is considered universally across all institutions as an appropriate number of students in a class. Going above that compromises feedback, compromises aspects of learning. So small class sizes with assessment in class. Can you do assessments in class? Well, there's definitely formative assessments happening in class for something like B&M 715 in the degree for differential diagnosis and physical examination. They do 2 formative assessments in class, one for physical examination, one for differential diagnosis. But something for everyone to think about who is teaching on the certificate program or the degree program. 6, co-constructed or integrative assessments. I really like this point 6. This is the idea of what already does happen in clinics. So Karen Mees will deliver different coursework across pre-clinic, which is a first semester, 3rd year course in the Bachelor of Natural Medicine program. And Karen's delivering content throughout the course, and that course content relates to the assessment. So it might be observation of a follow-up consultation, and the student's taking all of that information and then applying that to their assessment. That's one part of integrative assessment, where all the learning outcomes are coming together based on what's being taught in the coursework. Another way of doing that is taking 3 different assignments and then bringing them together for one final grade. So where there might be a part B and a part C, and those part B and C come together as part of integrating assessment. And it could be that part B is individual and part C is group. And what's interesting is there's a group assignment that's been run for the last 3 years as part of differential diagnosis and physical examination. And the assessment used to be very rote. So students would just come in and try and memorize 9 different physical assessments. Now they have to actually solve a problem and a case together, which you should do in clinical practice rather than just on your own. We want to teach people to collaborate and support each other. But in that process, people working together, it may not always gel. So we take that into consideration, that there can be bumps and hurdles. And how do you overcome that in assessment? Which you can, because in that assessment, if someone's not pulling their weight in a group, then they can come to the academic director, and this is clear, and they can go through the process of asking for just their work to be marked rather than having their grade affected by other people in their group. 7, multi-step assessment.
Sorry, can I ask a question? And I'm sorry if I'm slowing things down a little bit.
That's okay, go for it.
On that co-constructed, this year in particular has seen an increase in students collaborating on cases in clinic, which is good because brilliant. I really wanted to encourage that. And Phil would recognise this as well, is that the collaboration, whilst it's great, there have been some little glitches in it that they, and I've talked to multiple students about this, that they feel as if they have to come up with the same recommendations for the client, the same differential diagnosis, etc. And whilst that is great because they're collaborating and coming to the same conclusions, we know that no two naturopaths practice the same out in practice. And there's great collaboration and teamwork, but the downside of that is the independence of thought and their own critical thinking, clinical reasoning skills, that they're going along sometimes with other people. And so I've said to them, you don't have to have the same. It's okay if you discuss it, you learn from each other. One decides they want these herbs in a formula, the other one, and they could actually, as long as it's justified, you can come out with different herbal formulas, different nutritional recommendations, because you can have evidence for so many different things. But what I'm seeing is, there's a limitation there for when they actually graduate and doing something completely on their own, which is what they'll have to do, that I'm contemplating a scaffolding to the independent cases towards the end. So I was just, that co-constructed has benefits, but it's just, I'm starting to see a downside, and interested in Phil, if you are picking up on this as well when you're signing off cases.
Yes, I think there were certainly 2 or 3 students who just didn't get on and thought along completely different lines. And so you had completely sort of diverse ways of thinking that couldn't be molded together. I think it's okay outside the clinic for almost all the courses, but not during clinic. I don't think it works all that well at all from what I've seen so far.
And they feel as if, Phil, do you think they feel as if they have to come to the same answers, and therefore they're not trusting their own instincts and what they actually feel is right for the client? Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. They're not being allowed almost to think along their lines. They're being pulled across into someone else's lines, which isn't appropriate in clinic.
And it's the opposite of what I've tried to instill in them. It's about their knowledge, their experience, and also, as Heckman says, the intuitive side of being a practitioner. So they're actually quashing that a little bit to kind of agree with someone else.
That's happening.
Yeah, and also a couple of students, and I don't know if they've come to you for academic meetings, Mark, where one in particular has said, oh, she left me to complete it and I ended up doing most of the work on this case. So therefore they're being graded on something that they only completed a small amount of.
Yes.
So
there's a couple of points here. There's a couple of points here that I want to make. So the first one is, these are 8 points for appropriate measures based on the assessment and the context. So you've got to make sure, so it's not these 8 points go for every assignment, because you're obviously not going to do invigilated examinations for clinic. So what you're saying is really good in terms of when you're looking at your assessment, does co-constructed or integrative assessment, like Phil mentioned, actually align with the course and the types of assessment being done? So not that you have to do that. This is just a measure for whether it is contextually appropriate to your course. The second is that I would argue that when you're looking at assessment, you have to be very clear, and this is the problem with naturopathy I see, as it being syncretic, anything goes at any time, is that word of justification. What is actually true evidence, rather than a postmodernist or overly constructivist approach to, well, you can be right, you can be right, you can be right. If the assessment is such that everybody can be right based on how they're going to justify a point, then the assessment criteria has to take that in to context so that everybody is going to fulfill the criteria, everybody's going to fulfill all the learning outcomes, everybody's going to be signed off with 100%, or looking at it from the perspective like these authors were looking at from nursing, medical perspectives around allied health, is speaking to a conversation that, okay, if there is more than one response that can be granted, then is there appropriate documentation for the student to complete where there can be more than one response? So when you're thinking about this, don't think so much about, oh, I've got to do this for every single assignment. It may be appropriate, it may not be appropriate to each assignment, but at a much deeper level, asking yourself the question when things come up where there's a disagreement, is there a evidence? I understand there's types of evidence, but that does come through that syncritic approach to naturopathy, where it is everything goes. It's a strong argument of John Wardle, Matthew Leach, Amy Steele, that there is often one particular response, and if there can be a number of different herbal formulations created, then the assessment needs to cater for that. But don't feel like, if you're saying at the moment, for instance, Phil and Karen, it's not working, then I would say definitely you're looking at that assignment as to whether that should be part of the assignment at all, or whether or not the actual forms that students complete need to be updated so that it can express that information through their collaboration, and that they talk about collaboration in a different way. So rather than, oh, I feel like I've got to go with you, that they're analysing the strengths and limitations from each other's perspective on why they think that student is correct or why they think they're wrong. Like, that is a brilliant aspect of assignment that adds another level around critical thought, which is what you're wanting to get to in terms of critical thinking models, rather than someone just having to go with what the other person thinks. Like in DDPE, for instance, there are different conditions that can come up. So with the two students that had a situation, when I spoke to the course lecturers, both students could have actually expressed individually and as part of their group their different thoughts, because there were 2 or 3 options and that did align with their thoughts and views. But when it came down to it, it would have just been that there'd been so much distress created between the two individuals based on personality, which the researchers and the presenters talk about around group work, that that also needs to be overcome if there's problems in students collaborating with each other. Some students will come to me in year 1 and year 2 and say, oh, I thought that I would just be able to do all these assignments on my own. I don't want to collaborate with anyone. And that could be difficult because maybe it is your experience that you've got to work in an integrative clinic or with other people, or depending on the pathway that you go in. So there's a lot of points to consider in this, and I'll leave that for, that might be an assignment that you look at, Phil and Karen, one of your assignments that includes this, and that might be the one that you review. Is everyone good for me to go on? Okay, cool. So 7, multi-step assessment with soft and hard deadlines. So I really liked an assignment. It's probably one of the best assignments actually that I've ever worked on. when I was at Well Park, so a former college in Auckland, New Zealand, that was delivering a Bachelor of Naturopathy and Herbal Medicine, arguably from my perspective as a professional, better than the program at Torrens, Endeavour and South Pacific College. It was an amazing course that had been created and developed from very, very good research and a pragmatic perspective to practice put forward by Jill Dunn. So multi-step assessment, the course that I taught was Evidence-Based Practice 2. Students had to actually write a case study for submission to NMHNZ, which is a professional association, Sonia and Aqua, and anyone from Australia who is viewing this presentation. And as part of that particular assignment, students had checkpoints that they needed to meet so that their assignment in terms of the final product, which was a case study that was appropriate for submission to an NMHNZ competition, was finished on the day that it was due. And I do see this for some courses, particularly courses that allow students the option, going back to meaningful assessment, an important assessment where the student can choose their topic. So for instance, Wayne Hill, when he was delivering academic learning skills, and now Kath Minter delivering academic learning skills, that for their first assignment, students need to actually select a topic that they're going to write about. And for that topic, they can choose from a range of topics or even bring forward a topic that may not be listed there if it's appropriate and approved by their course lecturer. So that all needs to happen. That needs to be checked. The course lecturer and the student might need to check in with each other. So these softer deadlines of making sure that these things happen before that final product is actually submitted. Point 8, reference. This is something that I just am really frustrated with at the college, because there should be references in every PowerPoint presentation of the latest research or what is considered traditionally best, not something from 2004 that should actually now be 2023 because it's been rewritten and updated significantly or the theories have changed. So if a course lecturer is presenting reference in their PowerPoint presentation and going over journal articles, if you are presenting references that students aren't going to use for their assessment, you might ask yourself, well, why am I presenting these references? If they're not specific to the course content, and the course content must be significant to the assessment, and the assessment must be significant to the learning outcomes and the graduate profile outcomes, why is that reference there? And so do we just have a textbook for the sake of a textbook? Do we just have a journal for the sake of a journal? It's really important to make sure, and it's respectful of the student, that if you're going to present references in your presentations, that's one way of you going, oh, okay, I know that that's a quality reference. I know it has that information, and I know that that is an appropriate source. We've used that in classroom activities, that particular journal article or that information from that text. So I can be certain that that's going to be an appropriate source for students to use. So be thinking about how you actually use literature and how you present that information. And for someone like Sharon Simons, that could be very different when you're looking at computer and digital skills and what information you need to reference, because for Sharon, the information is changing so fast before Sharon may have even got through finishing teaching the course. So it's really important that if you're wanting students to reference appropriately, you're giving them examples to do that. That if you want students to reference appropriate sources, that you're referring to them in your work. That's really important, and not just one thing like a textbook. So that's step 2 of the 3 steps. Step 3, AI assessment hygiene practices. So 7 points here that you can take into consideration. So 1, AI necessary content has been delivered in time. So there's a current gap there. Lots of students know about AI, but the college definitely needs to include what's allowable and what's not in documentation like the SPC&M assignment and referencing guidelines. 2, avoid questions or topics that can be easily searched for or generated by AI. So I gave an example before of CSP 411, Introduction to Biological Sciences, that Sylvan Lockie delivers. I typed in the history of germ theory based on the topic question for the assignment. Now, what was interesting about the OpenAI when I did that, it only generated about 800 words. So I did need to start coming up with other terms and key content to be able to ensure that that met the overall word count for that assignment and actually did tick some additional boxes, but it can be achieved. And so thinking through these assignments, is your assignment appropriate around AI assessment hygiene practices? 3, instructions are clear, straightforward, and in plain English. This is where it can get tricky, because if it's not clear, this is without you saying anything. Don't say anything. Give them the assessment rubric and give them the course guideline and see if they would still get an A+ without you telling them anything. Because what should happen with assessment is everything should be in the one location. So not on Moodle, not on the course guideline, not on an extra document, all together in the one section. Is it clear? Is it straightforward? Is it in plain English? Yes, you might need to teach a student on how to do something that relates to the assignment, but the student should be able to read it and understand what they need to do, and then ask the question, oh, will you be teaching us how to do that, or do we need to research that for ourselves? Point 4, students have access to all the resources they need to complete assessment. Does your assessment include the need for resources that students will not be able to access? So it might be a best practice software. It might be the inclusion of content that, well, the student can't access that because we don't have that database, so they're not going to be able to access that journal. Do they have the resources to complete that? So if we go back to Foundations of Research, for instance, assignment 2, that second assignment asks students to look at fish oil and its effects on cardiovascular health. Now, what's interesting often about the assignment is that students need to read an article that was published in the New Zealand Herald by a writer by the name of Jamie Morgan, who still works for the New Zealand Herald. And they need to look at that article against a systematic review that was written on cardiovascular function and the use of omega-3s for cardiovascular health. And what will happen sometimes is that if you go and find that article via a search engine such as Google, and then you read the article and then you click on where Jamie Morgan, the author of the article, says this is where you'll find the systematic review, it'll take you to potentially a different or updated systematic review rather than the first publication of that systematic review in line with when that article was first written. That is an example of access to all resources. Do the students actually have access to the correct resource that you're referring to? Do you check the links? Do you make sure that students are going to access the information correctly? 5, honour code and ethical commitment. So students need to complete a cover sheet with their assignment. Also, when they're going through the process of Turnitin, to look at similarity detection between another assignment that is through the Turnitin database, that they are ticking that this is their work and not the work of others. That's part of their ethical commitment, but they also complete an academic integrity module. And where students have breached academic integrity, there are different processes they need to go through, and they have to come back and complete that. So I'm just going to minimize that PowerPoint presentation for a moment, and I'm just going to bring up the course lecturer handbook. And within the academic course lecturer handbook, you'll see an academic misconduct matrix. Now, the college didn't have this, unfortunately, before 2020. There was another gap, and I've had to implement this 3 times in the 3 years that I've been at the college. Has everybody read this? You just can say yes if you like. I'm just seeing Karen Mees on screen at the moment. So if you've read it, fantastic. If you haven't, I recommend that you do that. And why? Well, academic staff are part of detecting whether there's been a breach in academic integrity. And it's good for you to be aware of processes, particularly if you're involved in an area of a teaching team or if you're on the management team. It's really important to understand these processes and that they're benchmarked against international and regional standards. So just be aware that we do have systems in place to be able to support students. It's a collaborative process. We don't want people to be so upset that they can't continue with us, but there are students who will need to resubmit. And there have been students who have failed a course because of plagiarism. There was an instance in a test 2 years ago, I believe, and Phil Dowling successfully detected plagiarism in a pathophysiology test for a student, and that student was found to have copied information. They were externally monitored by someone as well, who meets our criteria for external invigilation, and had completed the work, but had obviously copied that because it was word for word based on the textbook. And to be able to memorize all of that, no one could say that the student didn't copy the work. Phil, did you want to speak to any of that? I don't know if you might be on mute, Phil, or you didn't want to speak to it. It's okay.
Okay, sorry. I do remember that. Sorry. I do remember that. That was a very, very obvious case of someone cheating, and it was very easy to pick up. And I just called you in straight away, I think, on that case, and we just dealt with it. But it needed dealing with because it was so clear and obvious.
Very, very much so. Very much so. So it has led in some cases to, students failing a course. And as you might know from the regulations, which are in the student handbook for your program, that if a student does fail a course once, this is for the degree, not for the certificate, then they have a second attempt at going through that course. If they fail it a second time, they will be out of the college. And for one student, that actually did lead to their exclusion from the college. So had failed the first time, failed the course the second time, and that was in 2021 was the last time that a student had failed a course twice. Thanks, Phil. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint presentation and these practices of hygiene around AI and assessment. 6, coherent and connected assessment quality and management practices. So this includes what we're already putting in place. So pre-assessment moderation. When I came to the college in 2020, pre-assessment moderation had 4 rows, and every pre-assessment moderation that I saw just said the word yes in handwriting. It didn't explain why the assessment was appropriate, why it was fair, why it met any of the principles of assessment. So it wasn't coherent, it wasn't connected, there wasn't quality, and there wasn't appropriate management practices. Post-assessment moderation. So we have very thorough post-assessment moderation to make sure that coherent, connected assessment quality management practices are put in place around course moderation, around grading of assignment, that these post-assessment moderation forms actually go to external moderators to give us feedback on whether or not our grading was appropriate to assessment. External moderation, and what's most important is benchmarking, which I sent around a report recently from the university sector in New Zealand to all staff, where Massey University was identified as not appropriately benchmarking their programs and their coursework. What you'll know is last year in 2022, it's due for benchmarking in 2023 for the certificate, but in 2022, every single course in the degree was benchmarked against courses at Torrens and Endeavour College, and it's in the process of being benchmarked through Southern Cross University. So benchmarking is essential. Benchmarking is in our quality policy. If you haven't read a quality policy, I wrote the quality policy. It was approved by an academic board. Prior to that, there was not a sound quality policy. I'm talking to you about why these things haven't been done, so hopefully you'll remember them more. It's a repetitive strategy of mine. 7, detection software is set up by the organisation and used appropriately. Let's have a look at this. So I will exit the PowerPoint, and I'm going to ask you to cast your eyes over Moodle. I'll just extend my session. Hopefully I won't need to log in again, but I might need to. So recently, Turnitin, that provides a percentage score for detection software. And in our grading procedure, as you will know, I hope, there's a recommendation for students not to be over 20%, but assessments vary. So someone could have a Turnitin score of 90%, and because of the type of assessment, that might have required a significant amount of reference and quote, the student may have not breached academic integrity at all, just with a higher percentage score. But we use that 20% because a lot of institutions use anywhere between 15 and 20%, but it's not a marker to say, oh, the person has definitely breached academic integrity. But what has happened recently? And I'm on the semester 2 Foundations of Research page, something that the college pay for through Turnitin, which is important. There's more software to add. But all teaching staff, pardon me, are aware that they can check Turnitin for an assignment submission. It's in the grading procedure. The procedure's been around for 2 years. It's heavily advertised. But what Turnitin also offer now, so I've just clicked on the percentage for this student. Is that once I enter their assignment through Turnitin, you'll see on the right-hand side, AI in blue. And you can see for this student that AI, in terms of the use of something like OpenAI, so ChatGPT, that for all of the metrics and all of the data and all of the systems that Turnitin feed into their program to be able to pick up whether the student used AI, that for this student, it was at 0%. So you're going to be able to check this as part of checking Turnitin scores. If something's 40% and you want to have a little bit more of a look at that and go, oh, okay, it's that because they've still met word count, but they've put in these extra references. And I'm going to talk to them about using so many references within an assignment, but they haven't plagiarized or they haven't copied work without appropriate information being put into the assessment. But AI is another component of this. Now, there are always holes, gaps, absences. So there can be false positives with the use of this AI tool through Turnitin that we as course lecturers have access to. So that false positive might actually indicate a high percentage, but when we then look into it, we might say, oh, no, the student hasn't taken from that textbook, or no, they haven't written this into OpenAI. I can see that it is in their own words. There's other work that they've completed before. It's very similar. So that's important. One of the recent talks I went to was from researchers at Macquarie University in Sydney. And these are IT experts, and we don't have the capacity for this at South Pacific College, but eventually we might need to. And it might be a collaborative process between like the Cairo College, Traditional Chinese Medicine College, South Pacific, similar to our databases. But at Macquarie University, they have IT teams working in academic integrity where they can actually identify for students in a cohort, so pathophysiology 2, pre-clinic, computer and digital skills, the sharing of IP addresses and information between students. They can actually identify where students are sharing their usernames, their passwords. And when the IT group identify that hundreds of students seem to be colluding with each other through the software they're using, it's very exclusive to their institution at the moment. It's called Wairu, and it refers to an owl-like fixture of just overviewing what's happening to a student cohort and whether there's any collusion, any cheating, any plagiarism taking place. So there are softwares that are being developed by IT specialists in universities to take the loading off course lecturers. But that is something that universities that receive, like Auckland University, $434 million in the year where our institution received 900,000. Obviously, you can pay for some other things, even though there's a lot more students at those institutions, the money isn't upscaling appropriately. So AI is now embedded within Turnitin, and you can have a look at there for percentage scores, and you can explore that a little bit as well. Okay, let's go back to that PowerPoint slide. So that last point, 7, detection software set up by the organisation and used appropriately. We have some detection software. Yes, there can be gaps. What's interesting is that for primary education and for secondary education, Turnitin hasn't really focused on that. So in a tertiary sense, where we've got certificates at the moment, level 4, there might be types of assignments such as the one that Sylvan has for CSP 411 that's historically been there around germ theory that you could put into OpenAI and generate your assignment. So it is something I did have at the last Australasian Academic Integrity conference. There was again a course lecturer. He teaches across a 4-year program at a major university. He showed assignments for year 1, year 2 and year 3. All of them through OpenAI received over 85%. So you have to be thinking about what your assignment is these days to deter or whether or not you can detect that. Great. Okay, so session objective 1, we've identified that there's a 3-step process around meaningful, important assessment that we need to look at deterring and detecting whether there's a breach to academic integrity. And the 3rd step is there AI assessment hygiene practices at your institution? Session objective 2, recognise how this model could be applied to assessment practices at SPCNM. So we actually do have pre-assessment moderation. If you were ever going to change an assignment, you have to fill out a pre-assessment moderation form. Like I said, 2020, it had just 4 simple rows. It didn't provide really any context for assessment. But even the one that has been created by benchmarking against other institutions, the academic administrator and myself, having that approved through the compliance subcommittee, having that presented at academic board, there are still inclusions to this. So again, I'm just going to minimize that presentation and we can have a look at the current pre-assessment moderation form. So if you ever wanted to change an assessment, you must complete this form. It's very, very important. You can't just change an assignment. At our 2018 EER, that was one major reason why the college went from excellent in some categories and a prior category 1 to category 2, because of making changes to things like assessment without actually going through the appropriate processes for it. So,
good question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
So when you say change in assessment, do you mean from one year to another? So the assessment's changed. Okay, so you're talking about it's already published in the course guideline.
Correct.
And now I want to, okay, thank you.
Correct. Yeah, correct. That's exactly right. A complete change to an assessment. If you're going to make an update to an assignment, so let's say that you're going to update your assessment rubric, or you're going to update some wording in the task description, you still have to fill out one of these. So it's for both. And we've got a procedure for creating a new assignment and updating an assignment. Yeah. So in part A, as some of you might know, if you've ever completed the pre-assessment moderation or had to do it, then you complete the part A points. That's fine. But part B, which I complete, and the next academic director will be starting probably late December, early January, will be looking at, like I do, is this section, part B. And with principles of assessment, there are 4 principles. So fairness, validity. Are we actually measuring what we say we're going to measure in an assessment? So I'm going to measure you against the learning outcomes. But I also made up some other things that I think are important in clinical practice. Wasn't in your assignment. I tricked you. I then deducted marks from you. That's a problem. Is it reliable? So if Sonia and I are grading an assessment and Sonia comes up with all C's for students and I come up with all A's, then we know that there's not strong inter-rater reliability, right? Where we've got different graders. Or at times, if we don't have clear rubrics, again, going back to 2020, there was a rubric that just said excellent, did a good job, and then 4 other points, but the rubrics weren't sophisticated, didn't tell students what they actually needed to do. It's the same now as the next step for the next academic director around task descriptions. You know, task descriptions that are in other institutions can be a page long rather than just one statement for a task description. Assessments need to be robust. So reliability, even if you're grading, if you're changing it up all the time because you don't have an anchor and a structure, then that's intra-rater reliability is compromised. If it's the same grader all the time, but you're changing every now and again with the assessment because there's not consistency there. Okay, now there needs to be authenticity around assessment as well, right? So we've got that kind of in there, that authentic aspect of assessment needs to be related to the real world environments, those naturalistic settings, what pathways people are going to go in. But does there need to be something in there that includes meaningful assessment based on those points? So I'm not asking you to answer this now. I'm just wanting to plant seeds so you can be thinking about this in the final activity. If we go further down, you'll see that one of the highlighted points that I've made is around assessment criteria is clearly stated for staff and students. that relates to that second step in the 3-step model around assessment design and academic integrity for measures for deterrence and detection. Do we place anything in the supporting information of the assessment? So you've got your task description, your rationale, your supporting information. In that supporting information, do you place anything in that section around breaches in academic integrity that could be possible? Or do we need to start putting some information in around these OpenAI, ChatGPT, or any other type that's coming through, right? In terms of what the metaverse is creating. So just thinking about, for us, just putting it up front in students' faces so they know, if I do this and Phil catches me, or Aqua catches me, or Sonia detects this, I'm probably not going to get away with it as easily. It can be difficult to detect these things. I was talking to Aqua Hastings yesterday about a conference I went to a year before from a professor who works in IT and loves the area of AI. And AI can pick up in assessment like extra gaps between letters, just minimal extra gaps between letters, or after a full stop, if a student's writing a beautifully sophisticated paragraph, but after every full stop, you're seeing like 3 spaces instead of 1. If the student's so good with their writing, if they're so good with their referencing, why did they not pick up 48 instances of spaces after a full stop? You need to just be thinking of what could be in terms of the use of AI for assessment. And then in terms of step 3, AI assessment detection practices around hygiene practices, I've only got down here things like NZQA type change, but I might need to put in some additional information, such as, okay, has this assignment, if I am to pilot the assignment, which should happen ideally, pilot the assignment, put that into OpenAI using something like ChatGPT. When I do that, then I submit it to turn it in, then I see an AI score. Does it register? Does it show that? Do we need to start writing those things in to a pre-assessment moderation where you can say, okay, I've looked at this assignment. It's not an authentic assignment, but I need the students to actually know this information because theoretically it's important to their clinical practice. I still need it to be an essay. I've looked at the essay. I've used AI software. These are the detections I've noticed. And does this need to be articulated by you, the course lecturer, the specialist who is delivering the course, so that I can see that information and write that you're aware of it, that students are going to be made aware of it, and that it's not going to be tolerated. So again, it's just planting some seeds and some ideas for you to move forward. So that's one point, pre-assessment moderation. I'm going to move on now, go back to the PowerPoint presentation. And we've looked at on that slide around pre-assessment moderation that yes, there is the possibility of this 3-step process adding some additional value to one of the procedures we already have in place around assessment, which is pre-assessment moderation. Now, we could look at it from a different perspective as well, SPC&M policies and frameworks. So with SPC&M policies and frameworks, assessment moderation policy, teaching and learning framework, quality policy. The quality policy demands benchmarking be used. If you ever change anything, you must compare it against 3 institutions who are already doing it, that have been doing it for some time. So, Sonia, changing assignments, for instance, a minimum of looking at the Endeavour subject outlines to see, is our assessment, even though they've said it's comparable, is our assessment really comparable? It's really important to make sure that benchmarking is mandated throughout the institution. This was something in 2018 that was picked up, something brought in 2022, something that NZQA absolutely loved, as does William Forey, the degree monitor for the Bachelor of Natural Medicine. And so too, in our consistency review with NZQA, really liked that we were implementing in 2020 when we had our consistency review for the New Zealand certificate in study and career preparation, that we're using benchmarking, right? Not just post-assessment moderation or external benchmarking against other institutions. So let's just have a look at the assessment moderation policy and also the teaching and learning framework. And I'm bringing these up just so that, again, I plant the seed in your mind that these are documents that you know about. How frequently do you go back to these? Unfortunately, in education, there's just a significant amount of administration. I'm in the fortunate position where I really love administration, but no course lecturer other than myself that I've ever spoken to says, oh, Mark, I'm on the exact same page as you and I love administration. Give me more. Is there a policy I can help you with? I have not yet heard that. So it is difficult to keep up, but again, that's part of the process, and looking at more and more systems of making sure that that's clearer for everybody. But I'm just going to scroll down on this assessment and moderation policy, because we're not going to look at all of it, but again, it's just another opportunity for me to say, hey, we have one. And I'm just going to lessen the percentage there, but I just highlighted a section that you might come back to when you're thinking through this policy in years to come. I won't be there from the 20th of December. And so when I wrote this initial policy and its approval back in 2022, we didn't have an assessment and moderation policy. So meaningful assessment, measures for deterrence and detection, AI assessment hygiene practices, that all comes into these sections on, remember, in meaningful assessment, what's the purpose? Quality assurance and assessment. Are we putting measures in place to deter and detect academic integrity being breached? Assessment design. When we think about assessment design, are the assessments meaningful? Are there measures in place to ensure that we're able to make the assessment fair, valid, reliable, and consistent by deterring breaches in academic integrity, detecting these things? Are there hygiene practices in place? Principles of assessment go into those hygiene practices. Adult learning principles go into those hygiene practices, because it's not just your responsibility. I sometimes feel like adult education has co-opted what's happening in kindergarten, in primary schools, where hands are held so tightly to make sure someone gets through that it's compromised the autonomy of the adult learner. I mentioned in a meeting the other day, I'm 41, I've had students in my class that are 60. Why am I telling them what to do? Their wisdom should be informing me. And in the teaching and learning framework, there's a section that I wrote, students and educators as partners. We're working together. I'm not responsible for doing your assignment. I'm responsible for facilitating coursework, not you knowing how to do everything. That's not my job as a course lecturer. And that principle of no, and you can go to the University of Newcastle, you can be a first year, you can go up to a professor and say, I don't know how to do this. Have you read your student handbook? Have you talked to your course coordinator? Have you talked to your tutor? Why do students need to be told everything all the time when the information is actually there 90% of the time? So it's really important to think about that three-step approach in the context of policy, and a policy that's important to you, assessment and moderation at SPCNM. So another policy that I had listed on that PowerPoint. Sorry, anyone want to speak? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure you're aware that the background noise, I'm struggling sometimes because it's quite distracting. And I know you might, I know you might not have another space to be in, but usually I'm fine with it. But you've got your headset in, so maybe it's not as loud for you as what we're hearing it.
It may not be. I think people are being a little bit quieter now. So my sincere apologies. I apologise for that. Sorry. Thank you.
It's just one of those things. I know you probably don't have another space, but I was
oh
gosh, it's getting louder.
I have some other spaces, but just the internet connectivity. I didn't want anything to drop out for anybody. That's the big thing, which can happen.
Mark.
Thank you. No, it's fine. I apologise. So on the teaching and learning framework, I won't go through the whole framework. Remember, there's a teaching and learning policy as well, but a framework attached to this. So I'm just going to scroll down. If you haven't read this, if you're a clinic supervisor or a clinic lecturer, please read it. It's very, very important because you actually do teach as a clinic supervisor as well in your grade assessment. So once upon a time where you didn't, you now do. And so it's really important to make sure that you are fully aware of these things. So I'm just going to go down a bit further to find my note or review. In the teaching and learning framework, there's a section called program and course design. So here, there's lots of information that you'll see that relates to meaningful assessment. You'll need to read through it. Measures for deterrence and detection. You need to have the right people actually in the design process. Minimum of 4 experts in a field or discipline. Academic Board have approved this. So they read it, whether or not they take all of the information in. I do when I write it. This includes a lot of our teaching staff who's also on the Academic Board. Experts should hold high degree qualifications in education and also teaching. So not just education, but also in teaching and learning, and preferably a postgraduate qualification. So master's, PhD in the field or discipline. So you want to have, in addition to an education qualification, your teaching and learning. So you really know in your qualification, have you been taught how to construct assignments? Have you been taught how to look at influencing learning based on assessment? So these points are important for the next academic director, but also for all of the course lecturers involved. And I can get external support at the moment when I'm going through this process. But even here, where the creation of a new program is approved, experts involved in program design, redesign have 3 months to complete a program proposal for their new or revised program. I've put a lot of these points in with these new programs that are being followed. I'd like to think that these types of points are being taken into consideration and everything completed. So please, please read these documents because they actually do relate to everything that I'm informing you on today. Meaningful assessment, measures for deterrence and detection, AI assessment hygiene practices. Are these points in these documents? I very much invite you over the next number of years, you don't have to rush into this, but invite you to be part of informing solutions at the college. So let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. SPC&M procedures. So there's a procedure for creating a new assessment or updating an assessment. And if you're going to follow hygienic practices, if you're going to make sure that AI could be detected, that you want to make sure there's no breaches in academic integrity, that procedure says that you cannot create a new assessment, updating an assessment where you just say, oh, I want to change the word from constructive to this word. I mean, that's fine if you just give me that the day before they're released. I understand that sometimes things happen. But if you're going to write a whole new assignment and then you want that to be given to students the next day, but only give me 1 day to do the pre-assessment moderation, that's impossible. Probably is possible, but it's an all-nighter and I really don't want to do that. So when Vardra and I created this procedure, which is in your procedures for course lecturer procedures, you've got to give us 3 months. And you have to table it at the post-assessment moderation meeting. You must table it there. So going through that procedure, if you really want to change, you need to follow that procedure. Procedure for internal moderation. That's just recently been updated. In that procedure, there's information around meaningful assessment, making sure that we're deterring and detecting breaches in academic integrity, but it can be updated to include information around AI. And we've also got a procedure for grading. Now, in that procedure for grading at the moment, we've got that you as a course lecturer must look at the Turnitin score if it's over 20% and go through it. And I'm sure most course lecturers are aware of that because the procedure's written. But in looking at that procedure, it doesn't have any information now on AI percentages and how to correct for false positives in case that does present. So we've got all of these measures for academic misconduct, but we don't have one of these latest ones that we need to update to our procedure for grading. So I'm just going to minimize that PowerPoint slide again, and I'll bring up one of the procedures, which is the procedure for internal moderation. This is super important for every single course lecturer at the college. If you don't have this ready and available, then please do. So for this procedure, it's got lots of information in it, but you can see that the pre-assessment moderation information is listed in that procedure. Down here on pre-assessment moderation administration, that point that I've put in there relates back to when I showed you the pre-assessment moderation form that you must complete if you want to change assessment. So how does that form now align with this procedure to make sure all of these steps are actually included? A number of those steps are there, but they can be further contextualized and developed so that it's clearer to you as a staff member as well. The same is true for post-assessment moderation. So you know that post-assessment moderation form you must complete after you grade an assessment. It finishes in the procedure for grading before you get into the procedure for internal moderation. What's happening here around making sure meaningful, measures for deterrence and detection, AI assessment hygiene practices? Do we need to make sure that's already embedded in the assignment through pre-assessment so that we can be confident in post-assessment that these issues aren't going to actually come up and that the appropriate people are trained for this? At the moment, Robin and I are doing the post-assessment moderation, and we'd love to train other people up. When I came in 2020, I know post-assessment moderation, they had to be doing that very, very fast. And it was a whole course lecturer cohort of people doing it then. But the only thing that I saw on those forms on the 4 rows was yes, 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 and yes. There was nothing about whether the assessment was fair. Everyone never seemed to need to change anything about their assessment. They just all got released. So now we're seeing, okay, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. You know, we've now got reconsideration of grade forms, everything to make it as fair as possible. And we just need, which is my hope one day, an administrator for every course lecturer. That would be fantastic. Or a teaching assistant. Anything like that would be fantastic. Or a teaching assistant even across, 3 level 5 courses, but a teaching assistant one-on-one for Karen Mees as an example, as a senior lecturer, as a clinic director, or others who are delivering level 7. So think about that, the procedure for internal moderation as well. Last session objective. Practice using this model against an SPC and an assignment. And I'm not really looking for anything massive here. I'm just seeing whether or not, from your knowledge of all of your experience in the workforce, in teaching, in learning, are you able to have a look at one of the assessments at the moment in a short amount of time, but later reflect on it with greater depth and think, yeah, what is not there around meaningful and important aspects of assessment that we talked about today? What's not there that could compromise academic integrity? What do I need to start thinking about around artificial intelligence? So that little kid there is Elsie when she's little. Okay, so there's 3 points here. Sorry, if no one knew who Elsie is, that is my 4th child, my youngest girl. Okay, in groups of 3, select one assignment currently used by a member of your group. So that's one thing we want to do. Use slides 6, 7, and 8. So I can send through via Teams the PowerPoint presentation. You can open slides 6, 7, and 8 to determine if the current assignment would meet the criteria for meaningful assessment, measures for deterrence and detection, and AI assessment hygiene practices. And one group will be asked to present their assessment to the group. So we probably won't have time for everything, but we'll see how we go. So I am going to hello, Stacey. I didn't see you, so I'm excited to see you here. Okay, let's do this as a team because of the 15 minutes that we have. And anybody open to having a look at an assignment? It doesn't have to be yours. That might be easier if it's someone else's. But do we want to bring up an assignment? I can go into it and bring it up for us and have a look at that assignment and whether or not it meets that 3-step approach. Does anyone want to have a look at that? Does anyone have any suggestions?
The one that comes to mind, but I know it's already going to be an AI issue, is the therapeutic relationship essay that the students write.
Okay, would you mind if we bring that up?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Oh,
that's in
Karen Mees is brave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go and grab that. It's an excellent, I mean, you can already hear, right, therapeutic relationship, how important it is for students to do that assignment, right? So I'm just going to minimize a few screens. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the college network. In the college network, I'll go to programs. I'm going to go into Bachelor of Natural Medicine. I'll go into semester 1. I'll go into course guidelines 2023. It's in pre-clinic. I'll copy the PDF. I'll bring it onto my desktop so it's a little bit easier to share and it doesn't have to go through the network. And it's thinking, and I'm hoping it's going to be there in a moment. And while that is processing at the moment, I'll just refresh your memory on 6. So it's going to be assessment is meaningful and important. So I can send through the PowerPoint presentation to you. Appropriate measures is the 2nd step for deterrence and detection. And the 3rd step, AI assessment practices. So I'm just going to close down the PowerPoint presentation so then I can send this through to you. So at least you've got that. And I'll also put it up on the teaching and learning. And I'll just put it in the chat is where I'll share it. If you can open it, great. If you can't, I think you've got a good understanding of what we've looked at today. I like the note too. I have a Thermomix. Yes, we do have a Thermomix. Okay, so I am going to share the PowerPoint. And that's just loading at the moment, so thanks for your patience. And I am sending that now, so should be able to open that and successfully shared. So I'll just organize this course guideline to come up. It doesn't seem to want to come across as a PDF. So what I'll do is, in case the Word document doesn't come over just because of the size of it, let's have a look at the course via Moodle. And I'll find the course guideline there. And I'm just going through and looking for that at the moment, and I will then share that with you. Just getting some feedback while this has happened. Has this been a helpful professional development session? Okay, great. So I think everyone will be able to see my screen in just a moment. And what you'll see when you do see it is the course guideline. So can everybody see the course guideline? And if you just say yes, that would be fantastic.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So we'll go past the practice case, and here we are. Assignment number 2, therapeutic relationship. So I just want you to be thinking through meaningful and important assessment, deterrence, detection, AI hygiene practices, what we've gone through. So there's an essay. So we know that essays in and of themselves can be a little more compromised now, if not a whole lot more compromised, because of the AI world. So I've got a therapeutic relationship. So we know that the assessment is meaningful and important. Does anyone want to speak to that? I think all of us as practitioners would have, whether you're a massage practitioner, whether you're a naturopath, you have an understanding that the therapeutic relationship is important to people who go out into the field. Would everybody agree with that? I can see lots of nods. Anyone want to speak to that? Nope. Okay, very good. Now the task. Write an essay following the essay format on page 25. So we've got an essay format in the assignment and referencing guide. Please include a title, introduction, subheadings, and conclusion. So of course, we could just copy and paste from OpenAI and then put those points in. So just because AI may not have them, I think that a student can still work around that. The topic of the essay is based on the following quote, and this is by Leah Heckman. Trust between the patient and practitioner develops over time as the therapeutic relationship develops and deepens. Thus, treatment can often address concerns that would have otherwise gone unnoticed without this relationship. Beautifully said. Now, what the student must do, if we go back up, right, write an essay, and it must be based on this particular quote specific to therapeutic relationship. So when we're looking at assessment being clear, making sure that assessment is straightforward, could we say that what is here is clear, straightforward for students? Would students get confused at all with what they need to complete? And just say yes, no, or voice your concern, because on screen I just see Karen Mees.
Yes, that's clear to me.
Great.
Now, I would think it was clear. However, 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago, based on students saying, oh, but what aspect of it and how do I do that? I wrote a separate document that I upload for students to clarify more and just put, and this comes back to what you said about it should be all in the one place.
Yes.
And I just pulled apart, well, what are the key words? Trust, therapeutic relationship, and addressing concerns that would otherwise go unnoticed. Now, that is all very easy for me to see, but students did need help pulling that apart to focus what they were going to write on.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I wouldn't have thought that. I would have looked at that and gone, okay, there's the quote, trust. You need to talk about trust. But this is the thing, is I'm not looking at it from a student's perspective. I'm looking at it from a lecturer perspective.
Indeed. And that is a really important distinction. That's great, Karen. Very good. So I think that there's that agreement between Phil's point of Phil looking at this with 30 plus years experience and going, who wouldn't understand what's written here? It's clear as day. And then also the experience of the course lecturer, having students provide the feedback to say, well, is there something I need to really hone in on here? And that adds to that AI conversation as well, because as soon as it's bolded or bulleted, trust is a big point, then they have those potential key words from their skills that they learn in foundations of research. I'll put into OpenAI. I need to write an essay on the therapeutic relationship, comma, it must include, and this is what I've done to assignments and it comes up beautifully, must include concepts of trust, relationship between the patient and the practitioner. As soon as you start putting in those key phrases, yes, there's some points that need to be contextualized. But that's where you might start to put in here some really specific points around naturopathy or herbal medicine or nutritional medicine that OpenAI may not be able to write specifically to, that is very specific to what is happening in a New Zealand context or what is happening within a regional area that is delivering a qualification in this space. Okay, we'll go down a bit further. Rationale. So the purpose of this assessment is to demonstrate how to establish rapport and build client relationships. Matthew Leach has some information on trusting connection, harmonious relationship. So what's interesting here is that there's been historical information on harmonious relationship by Spink, but then Matthew Leach, who we're aware of within this space, writing very specifically about this area and information around trusting connection. Again, it provides students with an opportunity to look at these resources, because it's not just what's been in the coursework, but also added to the assessment. So there's a lot of different points there. When we're looking at meaningful assessment and important assessment, Aqua or Sonia or Stacey or Sharon, do you want to add anything? Sharon's just actually completed, not to put you on the spot, Sharon's just completed a teaching and learning qualification, and Sharon's excellent in this space. She asked me so many questions that challenge me, which is really, really good. And so if you ever want to check in with Sharon, I hope I'm not putting any pressure on you, Sharon, please do that. Sharon is a wealth of knowledge as well. But is there anything that you want to speak to based on those the 3 steps in that model around assessment design and academic integrity so far, around the task description and the rationale?
Not really, but I was just observing that there was in the certificate course that I'm delivering the same thing as with Karen. There's an assignment and then another document uploaded.
Yes.
And I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with that because it should all just be in one place.
Exactly.
So based on that other one, the one that I deliver, it's the same. You look at it and students wouldn't be able to work out what they actually needed to do from that. And so I think maybe across the board, it's all the assignments need to be looked at in that respect if they've got two documents to be merged.
Indeed, any assignment
as far as
that has two documents should be reviewed. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sharon, keep going.
No, that's all I've really got to say on that. And yeah, I'm not really probably any more of a wealth of knowledge than anyone else, but everyone's quite knowledgeable on assessments.
Okay, I'll disagree with the statement, Sharon. Just for you. I think you're very knowledgeable.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so there's information there, and if we come down to the supporting information, Aqua, Sonia, Stacey, any points that you think could be added for this assignment in the supporting information based on that 3-step approach to assessment design and academic integrity?
Mark, my commentary is on the 3rd step about artificial intelligence. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, go for it.
3 steps. So I'm not so I'll highlight the context of my point, but I'm not well versed in things like ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. However, the small amount of research that I've done specific to my subject, that kind of essay question would be very easily and comprehensively answered in AI.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, we could jump on.
Yeah.
I don't want to go over time, and I'm on time now. But if I go into the open AI that I've set up, I'm hoping that it's just going to go straight into the ChatGPT.
While you're doing that, can I add a thought?
Go for it. Please do that, Stacey.
Thank you. There's, because I've had a thought about this whole, process as well. And there's a part of me that goes, does it matter? Because, what you're doing is the students are learning and gaining an appreciation of the concept. And so even, AI is actually going to teach them that as well. And I love the fact that you've got in there, Karen, speak to some real life practitioners, because I was sitting there going, oh my God, what a phenomenally exciting essay for them to write. Because, the last 2 clients I've had, I've reflected on this very point of how exciting the intel that I got based on the depth of the relationship allowed me to actually treat the very things that needed to be treated. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't have had that incredibly wonderful and rich relationship where they automatically brought me the information.
Yes.
It was that I just want to connect with you on this level. I'm bringing the most important thing in my life to you because I feel passionate about our relationship. And they didn't realize that they were actually bringing the therapeutic need. It was the relationship and the fact that they wanted to share the most important thing in their life. But the key was for me as the practitioner to be able to identify the therapeutic link in it. And ChatGPT can't teach them that,
yes.
But it can give them the basics for them to reflect on and see how that magic then comes together. So then talking to practitioners who live the dream will help them to make that link. So maybe we could make it essential that they actually have to reach out and
yes.
get real life examples.
Absolutely fantastic. An excellent way of challenging or overcoming potentially, and I think Karen's going to answer.
Yeah. Thank you. And I was just going to say, Sonia, that's one of the reasons the flaw as far as the potential for AI to be able to replicate a really good essay was one of the reasons this one came to mind, because even though it goes through Turnitin, There's still issues there. And one of the things that I started thinking about while you've been presenting this morning, Mark, was exactly what Stacey's just said, to actually make it a requirement to draw on their early experiences in clinic, but to also draw on speaking to a practitioner, which AI won't be able to do anything about. Personal communication, you can't replicate that. And because there's no independence of thought with AI, and that's the thing, is the independence of thought is the key element that I'm looking for from students here within the therapeutic relationship. So yeah, you've both nailed what I was thinking about this assessment and how it needs to change to make it AI proof to a degree.
Brilliant. Yeah, to whatever degree it can be. Oh, that's fantastic, Karen. And it's great to have Stacey as a clinic supervisor in that space as well. It's just absolutely brilliant. But you can see I put in certain keywords, and I haven't gone to the rubric. We'll finish up. But even if I put keywords in from the rubric, if a student thinks that this is going to be an appropriate submission for level 7 in the degree, the cornerstone of effective healthcare. I mean, it's not academic writing. And yes, I could put in different keywords, and I could challenge ChatGPT to create a more academic, content-driven assignment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be able to submit something like this when it requires a level of contextualization based on what the student is doing in a real life situation or environment. And we can also see, and Stacey touched on this point, that a student might utilize OpenAI, and it might provide them with not reference necessarily, but some points to think about around health outcomes, or is this going to be included because I can see this in the rubric and I'm just wanting to make more sense of this, and can I generate that information in real time quickly? Even William Forry, our degree monitor for the next 3 years, has indicated that when writing ethical statements for students in his ethics class, he's been an educator for around 35 years, he's constantly using ChatGPT, so he doesn't have to just think about these ethical scenarios frequently. He's generating them through this type of process. So there's space and opportunity for it, but we can see that there can be, whether there needs to be adjustments to anyone's assignment, and always we should be, as part of continuous improvement and enhanced quality assurance, we're always looking at our assignments. But again, this is just another value add of information where you look at something and you go, okay, I may have not looked at it like that from that perspective before, and this has given me, through this professional development, an opportunity to challenge my thinking, or what I was always thinking or already thinking in the case of Karen Mees for this assignment. So I think we'll close there. Are there any last words before we finish up? It was a good session of just some information, and I don't want to keep you for any longer.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, excellent. So
Mark, Aqua had her hand up there, so she might be about to type something in the chat.
Thank you, Aqua. Go for it. We're all anticipating what the chat message is going to be.
This is where being able to lip read would be really helpful.
Indeed, very much so, very much so. Great. AI has been detected. Yes, so what happens with detection of AI? Will there be a session on that? Probably not from me. It's throughout our procedures, Aqua, and when I have a one-on-one like academic development meeting with you, I could go through that, but this will be my last professional development that I'll give ever for the college, so I won't be providing any more sessions. The college does, unfortunately from my perspective, I'd like a professional development done every fortnight, but because there's just so much, and the more in your face where there's some collaboration and some free talk, probably the better. But yeah, in terms of where the college sits and what they can offer, there's 2 hours for teachers, semester 1 and semester 2. So there won't be another session in that, but I can definitely go over anyone at the academic development meetings at the moment, and Aqua, I can do that with you if you like. Yeah. Brilliant. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed the professional developments that I've given over the last number of years. So thank you very much for just your collaboration, your investment, and the time that you've spent, particularly people like Phil when they can't be here, just coming back, having a look at the session, providing feedback, providing guidance for younger course lecturers. If for Sonia and Aqua, if you ever want to reach out to Philip, he's taught everywhere and anywhere, and he has, again, a huge wealth of knowledge. So please, check in. Gemma just highly values Phil's guidance. So that from Gemma is like a big green tick. Yeah, so thank you to everybody. If you're going to watch this recording, now that you're at the end, if you want to provide any feedback, then the best way to do that is through a professional development form. We've just updated those professional development forms. So once I've got everything up on the teaching and learning in Moodle, please, I'll just instruct you to go and fill out that form, send that back. Why is it good to fill out that form? Because in your contract, it has down the professional development. You have to fill out that form so that you get paid for the professional development. That's whether you do that now live or if you do that after the fact and at a later date. So please send that through to me so that we can update and have a look at other things that the next academic director, Karen Mees is the clinic director, or what Karen Mees and I and the management team would love is that you are really supportive of each other to present. You all present every term. So I would really like to hear from Sharon Simons about teaching and learning. I'd like to look at making clinical practice relevant in class from Stacey Jarvis. I'd like to look at lots of different things that you have an interest in that you think people can incorporate into their teaching because of your years of experience. So definitely bring that to the attention of Karen Mees going forward as a management team member, because that's where the professional development often gets discussed. So I will see everybody at the next academic staff meeting, and thank you for your time today. Bye for now.
Don't go yet. Don't go yet. One moment. I just want to say thank you so much, Mark, for all of your professional development sessions. And I didn't quite register that this is your last one. So from me and all of the staff that have learned so much from you, incredibly grateful. And you have a wealth of knowledge, and it is so appreciated. And the things you've done at the time that you've been at the college is just... yeah, there was so many things that weren't in place until you were in place in your role. So yeah, just I wanted to take that time to say thanks.
Oh, that means a lot, Karen Mees. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And thanks for all of the thumbs up and claps and love hearts. That's very, very nice. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So
thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. You're most welcome. Bye for now. Enjoy the rest of your day. Talk soon. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Bye. See you, Sharon. See you, Sonia. See you, Aqua. See you, Phil. Bye, Stacey. Thank you.
Have you gone?